Okay, welcome mothers and others. Tonight we're speaking with Mike Collier, Democratic candidate who's running for lieutenant governor. Mike was born and raised in rural America, and he learned the importance of family, freedom, and hard work. The Colliers put down roots in Georgetown, right outside of Austin, Texas, in Williamson County. And as a student, he developed a lifelong love of music. He became a trumpet player. And when he went off to the University of Texas at Austin, he even played in the Longhorn Band. And if you are on his Facebook page or on Twitter, you will see that he put out a little video of him playing his trumpet the other day. So I definitely want to welcome you all to go look that up. Mike is a certified public accountant and an auditor. He worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he built a successful career in Texas energy. And he has a lot of experience with guiding companies on how to make investments, a lot of experience in renewable energy. And the reason that he entered politics is because he wanted to fight for Texas public schools. And, you know, I'm all about that. So that sounds great, Mike. We're ready to learn more. So with that introduction, I want to introduce you all to Mike Collier. Take it away.
Thank you, Nancy. I guess, first of all, good evening. I wish we could be together in person. I can't believe it's been 2 years of sitting here in my luxurious game room turned into an office. Suzanne and I are empty nesters. And so I spend all my time up here. So I wish we could be together, but hopefully we'll be on the other side of COVID. But I'm just delighted to have a chance to say a few words to you. And so thank you. That's a very flattering and lovely introduction, Nancy. So thank you for that. Yes, it's true. I have a desire to be the most famous trumpet player in the state. I'm not a good enough trumpet player to do it that way, so we'll just find another way to do it. So anyway, but I'm delighted to be here. And I think, Nancy, per our agreement, I don't think I make a speech, but I just say hello and then answer questions. Is that right? Or would you like to have a few minutes of a few introductory remarks?
Yes, you can definitely have a few introductory remarks.
Okay,
just
terrific.
It's worth, but you know.
No, I'll hold it to 5 minutes. I like the question and answer a lot better.
Okay.
I'll do my best to look at the camera. I'm never going to get used to having to look at the camera because I like to look at people when I'm in a meeting like this. But no, so I'm running for lieutenant governor. This is my second run for lieutenant governor. I ran in 2018. I'm very, very dissatisfied with the state of politics in the state of Texas. I'm very dissatisfied with the state of politics in the country. I have my own point of view as to what the root cause of that difficulty is. It very much has a nexus in what we're doing here in Texas, which we'll talk about. But my impulse to get involved in politics is this. I felt like, I've always felt, I think it must have been somebody that made a speech somewhere but if our political leaders had a skill that they learned in the private sector, if they came and offered it up to the public good, do good work, be honest, don't stay too long, I've always felt like politics would be a lot better. Somebody must have made that speech and it stuck with me while I was coming up the educational ranks. So I always had an impulse to do something when I could. And the skill that I have is finance and accounting. I'm a CPA. And the area of CPAing that I do is it's called merger and acquisition due diligence. It's a specialized form of audit. So when company A and company B merge or one buys the other, there's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of egos involved. There's a lot of wealth involved. And they hire an accounting team to keep people honest. And that's the good part of it. And it's very complicated. I've worked on some multi-billion-dollar global transactions with a lot of complexity. I love the complexity and I love the fight, and I sleep like a baby because my job is to keep people honest and I get paid to keep them honest. It's a great way to make a living. I decided to get involved in politics right after I turned 50 because it was time if I'm going to do something. And I was also very motivated by cuts to public education that took place coming out of the last recession. The recession hit at 8. It was almost over by 9. It was clearly over by 10. Legislature meets in 2011. They cut the budget starting in 12. I knew that this was a subterfuge. You just knew that they were playing this, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste game, that we did not have to make those cuts. And I was exactly right. They made the cuts saying that there was a deficit coming. They waited an appropriate interval and then said, well, we have a surplus. Isn't this great? And it was politics. And that was the last straw for me. When the Democrats were looking for somebody to run for comptroller in 2014, 13 for the 14 election. No one would run because Democrats don't win. And I said, well, sometimes you have to fight for what you believe in. So I ran, and I knew that I wouldn't win. I was told we wouldn't win. But I felt very strongly that if we don't have political competition in the state, we're not going to get good policy. And that's where I got started. I did not expect to run more than once. But I realized how big the state is and how complex this is. And I felt like I owed it to myself and to my party and to others that helped me to fight one more time. And I was not going to run a third time. I was only going to run a second time, except we got very close. We got very close in 2018. And so I have a very, very clear idea of where the votes are, which is why I'm doing this again. And so that really brings us to the present. It's very, very policy driven. And as we get into the question and answers, you'll see that I bring to this, my raison d'etre in the business world is, if I charge into a boardroom and say, y'all have a problem, I better also say, and here's the solution. Mm-hmm. Otherwise you get turned right around and off you go. And I don't really think that the lieutenant governor can solve any of these problems unless the lieutenant governor can make a convincing case for what the solution is, because the lieutenant governor is going to be surrounded by the same senators that have been behaving so badly. And so you're going to have to be not only very persuasive, but you're going to have to really win the arguments on public education, on property taxes, on fixing the grid, on criminal justice reform, and all the things that I believe in. And so it's just not good enough, in my opinion, to be anything other than hard charging, policy oriented lieutenant governor, because there's a lot of work that has to get done.
Yes.
And it'll be I predict it'll be a very stubborn, hard to move Senate. So that brings us to the present. So I've probably said all y'all want to hear from me. On a personal level, I keep forgetting to throw this in.
Oh, yeah.
Suzanne and I have been married she was my college sweetheart. I robbed the cradle. She's 2 years younger than me. We've been married 32 years. We have 2 sons. They went to UT. They got degrees. They came back to Houston to live with mom and dad. That lasted 2 years. They now live in Central Texas, where all young people go. And one of them is married, and we have a grandchild on the way, our first, a little girl.
Congratulations.
And I'm ecstatic.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Congratulations. So
thank you.
Yeah, we definitely need to leave all of our children a better Texas, right? So I'm with you there. So let's go right ahead and just you did hit on some of my first question right away. Okay, so this is your second run for lieutenant governor. You're within 5 points of winning the seat the last time.
4.8.
Yeah. Why do you
don't take that last 2 from me? That was hard to get that last point too.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, it was really close. So why do you think you fell short, and how do we bridge the gap in 2022?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, Dan Patrick spent $20 million and I spent $2 million. It was fun to raise money because nobody can win. Nobody can ever win. Democrats are never going to win. So, here's some gas money. But he spent all of that 20 million, and we saw that we were gaining on him despite the fact that he spent it. And I joke when I tell people this, but it isn't really joking. There's no amount of ad money in the world that can turn Dan Patrick into St. Patrick. People know him. If he's good at anything, he's good at making sure people know who he is, and people either like him or they don't. And they don't. And we were gaining on him right up to election day. And I could see, we were about six weeks out, and we saw that we were 5 points down. That's when he started to unload all that money. On election day, we were down by 4.8. And I got more votes than any other Democrat. And Beto's not here. He hates it when I tell people this, but it's important for folks to know this. And Beto and I have talked about it. But I've gotten more votes than Beto did in 2/3 of the counties in the state. And it's not because I'm a Beto. Clearly, I am not Beto O'Rourke. But Dan Patrick is very, very disliked, and I had a lot of crossover votes, and that's very, very important to what comes next, because the only way that I could win more votes, and don't get me wrong, Beto got more votes than I did. Yeah, he did well in the big cities. I did well in rural. My counties were rural. But the reason why it's important is what I believe is the key to success in our path to victory is to go into every county in the state, not just rural. It worked for me in rural because I had the resources to campaign effectively there. I'll have the resources to campaign effectively across all counties this time. But if you go out there and have a point of view as to here's the problem, here's the solution, I think, what do you think? And listen, then people begin to see this not as a partisan war, but almost like a job interview. Which one of these two, Collier or Patrick, is going to solve the public education problem, the property tax problem, the water infrastructure problem, the grid problem? And just by talking about the issues, you pull people out of their political mindset. And we had a lot of non-Democrats vote. Now, I don't know. I know when a Democrat votes for me because we have the data. I don't know who the other folks are, but I presume that they are independents and crossover Republicans. I presume that to be the case. So what does that mean for 2022? The issues that we confront are not getting any better. In many respects, they're getting worse. Witness property taxes, witness teacher retirement, witness the public education funding, which we can talk about. We have the grid now to talk about. I'd love to talk about the grid tonight. I can't say that I could see it coming. I could see problems in the summer coming. I didn't realize that we had been ignoring warnings as to winter. Now we all know. So we have more issues to talk about, less satisfaction. And I'm starting, 3.8 million votes to the good, add another million, and Dan Patrick is retired. So that's what 2022 is all about.
That's great. I'm trying to figure out what question to ask you next because I can go two directions. So I'm gonna hit with a couple of things right off the bat just to kind of get them over with. So many people may not know that at one point you used to be a Republican. And why did you make the switch? And why are you running as a Democrat now?
Yeah, so here's what I tell people. Long ago, I counted myself amongst the Republicans. There was a time when you could be pro-choice, as I am. You could be pro-LGBT, as I am. You could hate racism. You could love transparency and local control, and count yourself amongst the Republicans. And also, back then, it was the Republicans that talked to me as somebody in the business world. They're the ones that talked about our economic engine and job creation, which is somebody who spends his professional life in the economic realm. You know that if you don't get that right, you don't get anything right. So they spoke to me, they talked to me about those issues, and I felt at home. But there was a turning point, and it was right about the time that Bill White was our mayor in Houston, and Rick Perry was our governor, and they pretty much turned on a guy like me. I mean, they turned hostile to a guy like me in the first instance because I'm pro-choice. They turned on me, and pro-LGBT. They not only turned on me because of where I landed on the social issues, they also stopped talking to me about economic and job creating. In fact, I found them to be very dishonest about such things as taxes. And I say this to a lot of people, this is what I do. I get lied to for a living when it comes to money. As an auditor, I get lied to for a living. And that was the last straw. And the very last straw was when they cut public education by $5.4 billion. We all knew that it was based on a false premise. Everybody knew that. But the day came when we started the next legislative session. I'll never forget this. There was a press conference. Rick Perry standing in the center, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst on his right, Speaker of the House Strauss on his left. And the reporter said, okay, everybody wants to know if you're going to restore education funding now that we know that we didn't need to make those cuts. And Perry said, no. We increased public education funding. I'm the great Rick Perry, and we increased public education funding. And the Lieutenant Governor didn't say a word, and the Speaker of the House didn't say a word, and nobody said a word, and that lie was allowed to live. And that's when I made the switch. Okay. And I cold called the party. I read the newspaper. This is a true story. I read the Houston Chronicle that Susan Combs, the comptroller at the time, was stepping down. And here are the likely replacements. And there were 4 Republicans: Glenn Hager, Harvey Hildebrand, Joe Torres, Deborah Medina. I think I have those names right. And I kept reading, well, where are the Democrats? I mean, we don't have political competition if there's not a Democrat. It's just more of the same. No Democrats. I read in the last paragraph, there isn't likely, I don't remember who said this, there isn't likely to be a Democrat because Democrats never win. So I said, well, that's it. That's my cue. So I went online and I Googled the Democratic Party to find a number to call. And that's where it all started for me. And I went and saw Bill White. My answers will get shorter, by the way, don't worry.
Okay.
I went and saw Bill White before I did this. And I said, Bill, because he and I knew each other from the energy beat. And I said, okay, Bill, what's going to happen to me when I come out as a Democrat? He said, if you run a good campaign, you'll be fine. There are far more Democrats in the business world than are willing to admit. And that was my cue. And that conversation took place in, I want to say, the spring of 2013. And I have not looked back. I have not looked back. Turns out to be the second best decision I've ever made. Marrying Suzanne was the best, and making that switch was the second best.
Okay, that sounds great.
Shorter answers, don't worry. Shorter answers from now on, I promise, Nancy.
No, it's okay. We're totally fine. Let's see. Okay, so there's two hot items that you are mostly running on, and that is the grid and property taxes. So you said that people are paying way too much in property taxes right now, and there's still not enough funding for public schools. Explain to us, how do public schools, how are they funded right now? And what do you think the state, how are they failing public education?
Oh, so I'm so glad you asked that question. So our public schools are funded. Think of it as a partnership where local pays part, state pays part. The local taxes are 100% property taxes. Now, the state doesn't collect property taxes. Property taxes are collected locally. So the local component is property taxes. The state component is a result of revenues from such things as the oil and gas severance tax and the hotel occupancy tax and the franchise tax and sales tax and everything else. Local's property, everything else state. Now, what's happened over the years is property values keep going up because our state is a very desirable state. People want to live here, home values are going up. And so therefore, if you keep the property tax rates the same, the local property taxes go up. It's sort of like a crime without a criminal. It just happens. I mean, the rates go up. And what I discovered in my analysis is the way the state budget is set is they send economists out in the first instance to figure out how much more money will we take from homeowners. That's going to go up. So how much less money can we get away with from the state, keeping the actual funding the same? It's nothing but a transfer from state to local. Therefore, our property taxes go up, but we're not seeing any benefit from it at all. Now, when Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick were first elected, governor, lieutenant governor, so they were elected in 14, they got sworn in January of 15. They looked at the state budget and they saw a surplus. And they weren't honest. They weren't saying, well, we have more money than we need because property taxes are going to go way up. We don't have to put as much into schools. They looked at the state budget alone, said we have a surplus, and they cut taxes for the big corporations. Remember? Cut the margin tax by 25%. Estimated to be $2 billion per biennium. It's increased ever since then. And that made that shift from state to local permanent. And they aren't being honest with us. And that franchise tax has continued to decline. And now it gets even worse. It gets much worse if you're a homeowner. And follow me here. Now let's go back to the local taxes that keep going up and up and up. You can break that into two pieces. There's homeowners, and then there's large commercial industrial properties. The large commercial industrial properties have a loophole that was handed to them under cover of darkness in 1997 called the Equal and Uniform Law, which allows them to exploit the appraisal districts in this loophole and drive their value down, 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 which puts even more burden on homeowners and small businesses, and ours go up and up and up. And those are the owners of large commercial industrial properties, downtown skyscrapers, Valero, the refinery. They hate me something fierce, but all of these guys do it. They use that loophole to shake down the appraisal district in a way that a homeowner cannot. And they've been doing it since 1997. The last time it was measured was in 2006. It was measured by the central appraisal districts. They calculated that the state was missing $5 billion a year because of this loophole. No one has attempted to measure it since 2006, but it ain't gotten any better. It's gotten worse. So what I have been campaigning on, and now this may sound, fantastical. And I can point to the appraisal districts that did their review. I can report to work that was done by the Legislative Budget Board in 2015 in their GEAR report, Government Effectiveness and Efficiency Report. I think it's page 175. If I'm wrong, I'll get back to you, where it said, this is happening and it has to be fixed. So it's well documented. And furthermore, I have been campaigning on this and I wrote a book about it and I've done op-eds about this for 8 years now. No one has said I'm wrong. Not one person in the state, Democrat or Republican alike, has said I'm wrong. We all know. So to summarize, if we don't close that loophole, then they are mocking us for not closing that loophole and not dealing honestly with us. And here's the final problem is this. We do need more money in public education because our class sizes are too large, which means we need more teachers. That costs money. We don't have enough special education support. We know that because of some investigative work that was done. I knew anecdotally, but we knew from investigative work that was done by the Chronicle. That costs money. We don't have enough counselors. We have the lowest student to counselor ratio in the country. Counselors are an essential part of safety and security. And so we need to do those things to have great public schools, but we can't do it if we expect to go back to homeowners and ask them for more money because they're going to say no. So the only way to solve this problem, and you can't talk about schools without talking about that loophole, is you have to close the loophole. And Republicans, when they hear this story, I go out to West Texas and I talk about that loophole, Republicans get just as angry as I am. It is not a partisan loophole. It is just what I call a ripoff.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So how does Robinhood work into all of this? Because that's something I live in Austin, Texas. We pay more than 50% of our tax dollars that we collect for our school district goes into Robinhood. And, the schools here are run down. And then we have to get pass bonds to create more, up-to-date school buildings. My son's building was knocked down. We had to rebuild it because they had mold and they had rats and it was in terrible shape. So Robinhood has really impacted a lot.
Robinhood's an absolute disaster. It is an absolute disaster. It's an absolute disaster. When it was first designed, I think Ann Richards was governor. It was not without political controversy. But it was small potatoes back then. There are two things. It was a minor irritant, but it was not a crisis like it is now. The reason why it's become a crisis is there's two trends that have gone unmitigated, and it has now turned a small thing into a very, very big thing. I think that the Austin is the worst with 800, the number that I think I heard the other day, $864 million per year. It's taken from your pocket and sent out. What happened was when Robinhood was first designed, there are the state was different in two respects. The state government was putting in more and homeowners were putting in less. So state was putting in 60%, homeowners were putting in 40%. So that dampened the impact of Robinhood. Now it's reversed, where the state is putting in 40%, property taxes 60%. That caused everything to get bigger and badder. The other thing that's happened is there's just been this tremendous dislocation of home value. Like a home in Austin, if I were to take this house in Houston and pick it up and put it on a truck and put it in Austin, it would triple or quadruple in value, I'm sure. And taxes always go up and down with the valuation. So when Robinhood was designed, we were living in a world where there was greater parity in terms of home values, city by city. That parity is completely gone because we've changed. And so I'm very critical of the legislature and the leader of the legislature, Dan Patrick, because they haven't done anything to address it. One of the reasons why they don't address it is because it's not easy. It's not easy to solve that problem. But the hard problems are the ones we have to roll our sleeves up. Now, the solution lies in a combination of factors. Closing that loophole helps because that shrinks everything on the homeowner and small business side. Going back and we need to collect more money from the big corporations. They have gotten an easy ride here with the franchise tax becoming a margin tax and shrinking so that the state has to increase their share of funding. You have to do those two things. And then we have to adjust how Robinhood and those two things to do are conceptually easy, politically challenging. The hard part conceptually is we have to adjust the formula to allow for the disparity in terms of values of properties. And that's very, very hard, but we have to, because if we can't figure it out, then there's going to be enormous pressure on this state to do what none of us want and what I do not support, which is an income tax. We have decided as Texans that we want the property tax to be a substitute for the income tax. And I'm going to stick with that. I don't support an income tax, so don't get me wrong. But that means that we've got to get property taxes right, and we have to deal with that complexity. But that's where the answer lies.
That's great. One of the things that happened last week during the election was that some schools across Texas had bonds on the table. And a lot of these bonds didn't pass. A lot of the reasons they didn't pass were because, of course, the Republicans were putting out, like, if you pass this bond, your taxes are going to increase, which is not true. But it was really kind of hard to overcome that for some of these school districts to really sell it when the other side is talking a lot louder than you are. So can you explain to us how bonds work and just like what we should be doing about them?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say this. I mean, if you make a capital investment like a new school, let's have a new school building that has a 30-year life, then you're quite wise to finance it over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you issue bonds and you pay them back, and the cash flow is sort of matches the value of the asset. We do this in finance all the time. Where debt becomes a real issue is when you're using debt to finance day-to-day operating expenses. Then that's unfair. All you're doing is handing your children the cost of today's government. So I don't support that at all. So we have to be wise in terms of debt. The debt that we're taking on the books, which you have to be careful because you can still take on too much of it. But the debt that we're taking on the books, when school districts say we want bonds, if it's for capital investment, so that the duration of the bond is comparable to the duration of the asset, that's wise fiscal policy, particularly in a low interest rate environment. There's nothing wrong with that. But one must be very careful that we aren't using bonds to fund day-to-day operations. And there's no shortage of ways that clever accountants with mirrors and smoke. So you got to be real careful. The auditors have to do their job. I think the politics of debt are, let me put it to you this way. Politicians will politicize everything. You know, I mean, I'm a bit of the unicorn of the party, where my job is to try to take politics out of these things. Mm-hmm. What most politicians do is try to put politics into these things. And one of the things that politicians are doing is saying debt is bad, debt is bad. You have others out there saying debt is great, debt is great, debt is great. The right answer is debt is great, debt is good if the duration of the liability is equal to the duration of the asset in a low interest rate environment. The challenge is, I would love to see us reach a slightly higher plane in terms of how we communicate these concepts. What I'm saying is not incomprehensible to the ordinary working Texan. I think Texans get it. We just need politicians who will explain. If anybody can emerge, if anybody in modern politics can emerge as being trusted, and I've said this many times, my wife is a witness. Maybe you all are too young to remember Walter Cronkite.
No,
remember Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America?
Yeah.
The most trusted man in America? It would be a joy to emerge as somebody that people trust when it comes to money.
That is
so
true.
You can have this conversation. And so people aren't saying, I wonder what angle is this guy? What angle is this guy promoting? No, it's Mike. We trust Mike. Which, by the way, Nancy, is one of the reasons why I'm not going to take any money from any of the corporate PACs.
Okay.
For my campaign. I don't have to because we have a digital machine. We're going to raise plenty of money. And I don't want anybody to doubt who so if I'm honored to be lieutenant governor and I stand up there and I say, here's what the financial implications of the decision we just made are, at least people will say, yeah, well, Mike's working for us. I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Medicaid expansion real quick. So how do you feel about the Medicaid expansion, especially as a CPA? And what would you do to what do you think we should be doing to expand this to Texas? Because we're paying for it. We're paying
Medicaid is
the kitty. We're just not pulling it, which is
Medicaid is
expanding
Medicaid is a good financial deal. It's a good financial deal. It makes a lot of sense. You can look to the Texas Methodist Foundation has done it. I mean, there was a lot of work that was done when we had to choose. And so the Texas Methodist Foundation looked at it. Billy Hamilton, one of the most Billy Hamilton might very well be the Walter Cronkite of the Texas budget. I think Billy Hamilton now works for Sharp at A&M, but he used to be a powerhouse in the legislative budget. He looked at it for the Texas Methodist Foundation, saw that it was a good deal for the state. Perryman Group, which is very, very, very well respected economics firm, not partisan, looked at it. The Kaiser Foundation looked at it. I've looked at it. Everyone who's looked at it has said it's a good economic deal for the state. And that's one of the reasons why the business community was behind it. And each time a state expands, and now we're up to 38 states, I think, and we're the laggards, it becomes more important that we do it, because each time another state expands, we pick up some of their load in terms of their cost of healthcare, but they don't reciprocate and pick up in the cost of ours. So it's a good financial deal, and it solves a handful of problems. First of all, we have a real problem with affordability when it comes to healthcare, and people that are working the best job they can, but they can't afford it for their families. A healthy workforce is a productive workforce. I think there's a moral aspect to it, because I personally think that healthcare is a fundamental human right. We're very wealthy, very, very wealthy nation and state. So it addresses that. One of the misconceptions is it's free. It's not free. I mean, you have to be working to get into the program. It also reduces costs in some regards. When people go to the clinic, the cost of service is about 1/8 of when they go to the emergency. And it also solves a problem that we have in rural Texas. It doesn't solve it, but it would help with hospitals closing. Outside the big cities, Texans are very concerned about hospitals closing. I think we had 24 hospitals have closed already since we refused to expand Medicaid. So there's a lot of good that comes with it. It's a good financial deal from the state. I know from my friends and contacts in the Capitol that a fair number of Republicans are talking openly about how we need to expand Medicaid. But at the very top, the lieutenant governor is stuck on this, we're not going to do it. And it's just pure belligerence and financial folly. So it's a long way of saying, yeah, we ought to expand it. And I think the votes are there. I really do.
Yes. Okay. So we need to talk about the grid. Let's talk about the grid before we open up for questions. I have 2 more questions for you, but let's talk about the grid first. Yeah. All right. So we had, every single time we talk about February, who doesn't go like this? Everybody sort of like shudders a little bit, because we're just not going to get over what happened in February. It's permanently in our brains now. There was a lot of trauma because of it. We lost 700 Texans due to the power grid failure. Texas has its own grid. It doesn't seem like, of course, we had several sessions of the ledge and nothing's been done about it. So tell us what your approach is to the grid and what you think about it. What's going on? What should we be doing?
I need to fix the damn grid. I hope you don't mind my French, but
go ahead.
It took a lot of work for my campaign team to tell me it was okay to use that bad word. In my private life, I cussed like a sailor, but I made a commitment to my recently departed mom that I wouldn't cuss on the campaign trail, but she gave me permission to say that. No, we have to fix the damn grid. As a background, it was Enron that designed this thing, and they're the ones that had the most lobbyists to get Rick Perry in the legislature back whenever it was 20 years ago. It was not put together in a way that it was sustainable. I have been worried about it. I thought the concern was that we weren't building enough generating capacity. Everything's market driven, but there wasn't enough incentive to build generating capacity to keep up with the state. Wind and solar were picking up the slack, but a large part of our portfolio is in renewables, which means that if you get into a summer month, if the wind stops blowing, you could have rolling blackouts, and that's where we're headed. And I've known that we were headed into a bad place on the winter. What I didn't realize is we'd have a problem in the winter, because I didn't know, I do now, but I didn't know that the legislature had been warned repeatedly that this kit is not winterized. And if you don't winterize, we could have a failure. And it was in 2017, ERCOT, which went back into the very careful analysis of some of the difficulties we had in the cold snap in 16. You might recall I had a real cold snap in 16. We had a cold snap in 11. 16 was a bad one. In 17, they did the work, and they said to the legislature, if you don't winterize this grid, they said, these were their words, failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And the legislature has ignored that, and they continued to ignore it. They have not done anything to winterize the grid. And let me just explain that you have 2, I'm going to oversimplify it, but you have the generators, and you have the fuel supply. The generators seem to be more receptive to heaters, sensing equipment, windbreaks, things that you do. But it's the gas producers that have dug in and said, no, we ain't doing it. We are not winterizing. Nothing has been done to winterize the gas production, which is more than half of where it could. And that's not right. That's not right. And they're faking it. They're faking it. And you can read, I read an op-ed from Todd Staples, who's head of the Texas Oil and Gas Commission, or organization, whatever they call themselves, the lobbying group. And he had this nice long op-ed for the Houston Chronicle. No, it's not true. We aren't doing anything. Why we're making lists and having meetings and making lists. They are faking it. These gas producers are not winterizing, and we're headed towards a winter. And I don't know what's going to happen, but we are not winterizing. And that isn't right. And I lay the blame at the Railroad Commission's feet. And we issued a press release today, and you saw what else. It's not just the fact that they're not winterizing, but you had some gas companies that made an unbelievable amount of money and squeezed the gas distribution companies. And the Railroad Commission today approved $3.6 billion in bonds. We're going to bail these people out so that these guys can keep their money, and you and I and consumers are going to pay for it. It is by far the most corrupt thing I've seen in my years of watching the state government. And so I am very, very critical of the Texas Railroad Commission. We're going to have a lot to say about it. I think we need to reform that. This is a case where the industry dominates the regulators. And it's my home industry. So I know how this game is played. So I think it's time we get very, very tough with the Railroad Commission. Otherwise, we're never going to winterize this grid. So we got to do a number of things. We have to winterize it right away. And then we have to change incentive structure so that we have the base load capacity so that we can deal with a hot summer. And then to the extent that we're increasing our investment in wind and solar, which the whole world wants us to do, and we want to, we should lead the energy revolution. Otherwise, it's happening with or without us. So we got to lead it. We also have to have transmission capacity to get from West Texas to the markets. ERCOT is, I've been talking to these guys. ERCOT is clamping down on transmission capacity. They're trying to choke off new investment in wind and solar. That is bad policy. And then we also have to invest aggressively in the technologies that turn intermittent into base load. Not completely, but through smart grid and battery technology, you can have a wind farm and a solar farm and have intermittent supply, which does not automatically translate into intermittent finding its way to our home. So those are the things. We have to do all of those things. Yeah. We have to do them intelligently. But the most important thing, which has to be done now, is to winterize, and it's the gas wells need to be winterized. Yes. And they aren't doing it. They are not doing it. And they know they're not doing it. And Dan Patrick knows they're not doing it.
That's right. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk a little bit about the Texas Democratic Party. So right now in the Texas Democratic Party, when we think of all the names that are being tossed around right now, I'm just going to be honest with you. You guys are all white guys. Why are we just talking about white guys? The year is, 2021. Why is there not more diversity in the party right now? Especially when Democrats sell themselves as diversity and inclusion. We do have some great candidates that are running for office and other that are diverse and women and people of color. But for the guys that are taking up all the space are Beto, you, and Matthew Dowd. And you guys are just a bunch of white guys. So what are you going to do to help Latinas like myself and other women like myself and people of color? What do you think we should be doing as a party to diversify and actually practice what we preach?
Great question. And I'm glad you asked it. I'll first start by saying I was on the ballot in 2014 when I ran for comptroller, and that was a diverse ticket, and I was very proud of that. And I was on the ballot in 2018, and that was a very diverse ticket, and I was very proud of that. And on the one hand, we got a lot of Democrats that will be running. So Democrats in total will be very diverse, and I'm proud of that. But at the very top, it's white guys. And it wasn't done intentionally. I mean, I don't think anybody is designing it this way. It just happened. It just happened. And so it's important then. I mean, if this is how the state of play is when we get through the nomination process, then we have to do a couple of things, probably three things. First of all, there's more slots to fill in the statewide races, right? So there's land, ag, railroad commission. We have justices, judges. So we should be very, very actively trying to find candidates and give them the courage. There's probably an awful lot of people that want to run, but they're afraid to. And there's something like, for example, I'd love to see somebody step up and run for controller. I'd love to see a woman of color step up and run for controller. It's not my job to recruit candidates. That would be improper for me to do that. But I tell the whole world, if anybody's thinking about doing it and they just need a little boost, a boost of confidence, call me. We'll run together. We'll have a lot of fun doing it. So we have to fill out that slate as best we can. Second, we have to make sure that our teams are diverse. And that's very, very important, because the importance of diversity, in my opinion, is the importance of representing everybody's point of view and not stepping into what humans often do, is they sort of view everything through their own lens, not even realizing that they aren't seeing it the same way as somebody else. I can tell you on my team, it's a very versatile team. More than half the team are women. I think it's like 22 people that are working on this. More than half are women, more than half are people of color. And so that as teams, we have to have that orientation. As leaders, we have to bring that. And then finally, we will have a diverse slate of Democrats writ large. We must campaign together and do it with pride. So in other words, we can't have a situation where the folks at the top of the ticket are out doing their own thing, and they're not paying any attention to folks that are running for the state house or Congress or judges. When we show up on a stage, people have to see the state. They have to see that we look like the state, we think like the state, we believe like the state, and the state is a very, very diverse state. And so those are the three things that I know that's what I'm passionate about.
Okay, great. So that kind of brings me to another question. So you said that we all need to work together, and I think that was a really good thing to mention. One of the things that, so if you don't get the nomination, will you continue to work with other Democrats to make sure that Democrats get elected?
Of course. Oh, of course. Yeah. I've said many times when I'm on the stump now, I started saying this the day after the election in 2018. When we looked at the numbers and I saw that I got 3.8 million votes, my initial reaction was, my job now is to make sure that those 3.8 million come back, plus another million, to elect the next lieutenant governor to be a Democrat. And we'll decide who that is in due course. I had to decide whether I would enter the race. But I had no doubt that my job was to build on our success in 2018 to make sure the next lieutenant governor is a Democrat. And that's what I've been focused on since the day after the election.
Great. So you're a team.
Good. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna ask you, okay, are you vaccinated?
I am.
Great.
Yeah.
Are you boosted up too?
I absolutely.
Rock on. Okay.
Absolutely.
Just, I don't know if anybody's asked you if you're vaccinated yet. I couldn't
when
find
they publish the vaccination rules, 60 years old and you have to have a BMI of 34. I said, Suzanne, stop yelling at me for once and pass the enchiladas. I'm going to stay as fat as I can be. I'm deep into the BMI index. They didn't even ask me to show any proof. No, I'm pro-vaccination. I'm pro-vaccination. My whole family is.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. That's good to know. Okay, so we have a group of really diverse mothers and others, because we include everybody. We're all inclusive. If you want to join our group, you're absolutely invited. So it's women, men, moms of cats, moms of dogs, moms of goldfish, everybody's invited. So one of the things that we do as a group, because we're really inclusive group, is that we are also all over Texas. So we're in cities, we're in suburbs, we're in rural places. So we want to know a couple of things. One of them is, what could you tell us about how to reach the rural vote in Texas? How to change them to become Democrats? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I can tell you that I've learned from experience, what I'm gonna say now may at first seem partisan, but you'll realize just bear with me, because when you get to the end of this, you'll realize that it's quite not partisan. But let's assume for a minute that fate smiles on me and I'm the nominee. Then my job is not, in my opinion, My job is to not find Republicans to try to change their mind, because I don't know which ones will. I don't know which ones will respond to me, and I don't know which ones won't respond to me. And I know that from many, many years of trial and error on the campaign trail. So my job is to make sure that I mobilize them, that I don't go, my job is not to change anybody's mind. My job is to find people of like mind and make sure that they are motivated to go to the polls. But to do it in a very public way, because there's lots and lots of non-Democrats that would like to vote for something else, but they're afraid of us. Those are the folks that will cross over and they'll vote for us and they'll come find us. And that's what I learned. And I want to share with you a couple of things. I can compare 14 to 18. So I ran in 14 for comptroller. And this was so formative. I was hearing that folks in Midland were really unhappy because there wasn't enough school funding. And one of the two high schools was going to get new football uniforms and the other one wasn't. And everybody's mad, right? So I had my opponent. I had a tape of him kind of, ha, 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 we cut public education or something like that. So we did a poll, and then we ran some TV commercials, and then we did another poll. And the poll that we took is that, how do you feel about education? Well, we feel pretty unhappy about it. How do you feel about the comptroller race? We don't have the slightest idea. Then we ran our TV commercials where we showed my opponent laughing about public education. Then we took the poll again. And the poll that came back said, now we're really upset about public education and we're going to vote for the Republican. And that's when you realized that it doesn't do you any good to try to change people's minds. The job is to find people of like mind. But if you hold your head high and firm in what you believe and talk to Democrats, but do it in a very public way, independents and Republicans will come find us and they'll say, I like that. And then the other thing, and this is so, so important, is in my opinion, the only way to get people out of the partisan frame is to talk very, very specific and granular about the issues. If you go into Midland and you talk about property taxes and public education and fixing the grid and water infrastructure, and you are specific, then Republicans will stop and listen to a Democrat. And they'll stop thinking in terms of a partisan frame. But it has to be linked to something that's very, very real in their life. And then they have to believe you. It has to be substantive and there has to be depth to it. Mm-hmm. That was the key to success in 18. That's precisely how, if I'm honored to have the nomination, we'll run this campaign. And I fight a little bit. I fight a little bit with my campaign team because they would rather see, poll tested broad assertions of this and broad assertions of that, which may motivate some people, but it does not produce crossover votes. It does not produce crossover votes. You have to be able to go out to West Texas and talk to farmers and talk about the decline rates of the Ogallala Reservoir and how many years you have left. And what are the choices in terms of land use? And what are the choices in terms of shoring up that aquifer? You say that on TV and people are listening to you. Mm-hmm. And if it's just airy-fairy assertions, then you won't get crossover vote. You just won't. So that's the key to success, in my opinion.
Okay, so we're going to do some speed questions because we had a lot of questions from our members. So the first one is from Stephanie, who said, the Texas Democratic Party has been asleep and the DNC has been absent. Candidate recruitment has been a lost cause over the last few cycles. What do you think?
Well, until we start winning, it's hard for people to make the decision to run for office. I mean, there aren't very many people crazy enough to say, I'm going to quit my job and run for a position I can't win for the sake of changing the state bit by bit by bit. We have to win. I am not at all critical of the Texas Democratic Party and the problems associated with finding and funding candidates because people don't have the confidence that we can win. Now, we got a taste of victory in 2018 because we added, I think, 12 House seats. It created enormous enthusiasm. But our enthusiasm was dampened in 2020 because we didn't make any additional headway. I personally think that winning a statewide race and the Republicans have served up three very vulnerable candidates, in my opinion, at the very top. And so winning any one of those will then the newspapers won't say Democrats never win. It's been 30 years. The newspapers will say Democrats are now winning, and that will change everything in terms of very high quality candidates willing to take the risk, willing to confront their neighbors and say, guess what, I'm running for office. Oh, by the way, I'm running for as a Democrat. And it'll help the donors. And so there'll be more money coming into the system. And so what I say to the donors that I talk to, we cannot let this opportunity slip from our grasp to beat, for example, Dan Patrick. If we don't beat Dan Patrick and put everything we've got into beating Dan Patrick, then shame on us, because it is such an important opportunity.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So the next question is from Carrie, and she's asking, do you believe in Texas paying for maternal and paternal time off for families?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think, there's been a real change in our country that even I can tell from a kid who was born in 1961. I mean, it used to be your dad worked, your mom didn't, and you managed to get by and take vacations and the rest. That was my growing up experience. Things have changed quite dramatically. The cost of everything's gone up. Incomes have not kept up. Now you have both mom and dad working, and now what in the world do you do? And we can decide that we don't care about this trend, or we can decide that we'll do something about it. I personally think that we are not stable and prosperous unless the working and the middle class feel stable and prosperous. And I know from my work, many years ago, I was an analyst who worked for our world chairman at Price Waterhouse, and we were evaluating third world countries, trying to decide where did we want to make investments, where will those countries be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And we were looking for two things: democracy that worked and a thriving middle class. And we were saying no to countries that are resource rich, but did not have thriving democracies and did not have a thriving middle class, because their GDP per head is just not going to grow. And so you're not truly prosperous unless the working and the middle class feel prosperous. And I think it's absolutely good policy, good investment to support workers, to help them with their families. I think we get a return on that investment. So the answer is absolutely yes. Do we do it alone as a state? No, I don't think so. I think companies have to step up. And I'm sure that there's a federal program out there. I mean, we're kind of all in this together. But I do know one of the things that the lieutenant governor can do is there's the direct impact on policy by leading the Senate, but there's the indirect impact on policy, which is just as powerful, which is going out and talking, being a teacher and a preacher. Because if you think about the politics of the state, we've got quite a lot of reforming to do in terms of how we view what really is a good investment, what really is not a good investment. I mean, we find ourselves stuck in a spot where the party that I oppose has convinced an awful lot of people that even 1 penny spent is a bad answer, when that's just not right. And so the lieutenant governor, who can talk economics, can do an awful lot to change. It'll have a huge impact on what gets done in the Senate. It'll have a huge impact on our state. Probably be the best part of the job. So.
That sounds great. So the next question is also from Carrie. She asks, it's kind of something that's like the hot button issue right now. So where do you stand with teaching critical race theory and like all of that, things that we're hearing from the right currently?
I think that we should teach history completely, comprehensively, honestly. I trust the teachers. I think we should celebrate our unbelievable successes. We should learn from the things that we didn't get right. I think the legislature should stay completely out of it. And I think the CRT is just another example of an issue being politicized in the interest of getting votes. I mean, there are politicians out there that will politicize anything they can get their hands on. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that I really don't like about it. We did not have a problem. I don't think we had a problem until the CRT thing, which I think is a bit of an invention designed to get people anxious. I think we should teach. I think the legislature should stay out of what gets taught in the classroom. There are professionals to handle that. We should teach history completely, comprehensively, objectively. I know it's worth repeating. Celebrate the great things, of which are the countless things to celebrate, and learn from our mistakes. That's essential, in my opinion.
That sounds good. Now, already asked a question about gerrymandering. So if you won this position, you're going to have a ledge that has been gerrymandered to bits. What would your approach be to gerrymandering, and how would you work with, how would you plan on working with gerrymandered ledge?
So first of all, I think gerrymandering, I'm glad you asked. I think gerrymandering is the root cause of our political difficulties in this country. I think we should move as quickly as we can to an independent redistricting commission. We should do that with a great sense of urgency. I think other states will follow. And I fear for our democracy if we don't do it quickly. Now, let me explain.
Mhm.
I do believe that gerrymandering is the root cause of our political difficulties in the country. Both parties do it. Nobody gets a pass. You go to a Democrat-controlled state, the Democrats are doing it. Republican-controlled state, Republicans are doing it. It's the root cause of our difficulties because these districts are drawn to be either pure R or pure D, right?
Mhm.
And then you want to make sure that your R's outnumber the D's, or if you're in a Democrat state, the D's outnumber the R's. But the districts are drawn, for the most part, to be pure. There are very few competitive districts. So if you are representing, and we're talking about hundreds of elected officials around the country, if you are representing a district that's just your party, you never have to worry about the other party. The other party is never going to beat you. You want to keep your job, you only have to worry about your own party, which means that you go as far into the partisan corner as you possibly can to protect yourself from a primary. So if you hold office, you hold Congress or state rep, you go to Washington or you go to Austin in today's world, and you try to get something done and you compromise, you come back to your district, you get a primary opponent. They say he can't be trusted. You know, when Beto and Will Hurd rode in their car together, where there was a freeze, a Democrat and Republican, people melted down over this. That's how bad it is. Now imagine if the districts were drawn so that they have Democrats and Republicans in, and you're representing that district. You go to Washington, you go to Austin, you do your best, you come home and explain yourself, and everybody's mad. And that's good, because then you have to be good in terms of bringing people together, finding common ground, communicating. You have to be a statesman to survive. If we had independent redistricting commissions, then our politicians would be, the successful ones would be statesmen and stateswomen. Instead, with gerrymandering, the successful ones are partisan warriors. What I think we should do in Texas is go to an independent redistricting commission. It's within the power of the lieutenant governor to tee this up with the Senate. I'm not sure we're going to get a yes vote the first time. But I think you get two perfectly good legislative sessions separated by 18 months. I think that the vast majority of Texans would agree with this, and they'd be quite prepared to vote to amend the Constitution. And they would put an expectation on the legislature, pass that and bring it to us. That's what we want. So this lieutenant governor, if I'm honored to be the lieutenant governor, I'll commit you to this. I'll put every bit of political capital I have into fighting that fight, even if it means I lose. Because anything else that we might achieve together is only temporary until the next partisan wave, whereas an independent redistricting commission is permanent. Furthermore, because it would be such a big fight, the whole country will be watching. Other states will follow. Imagine the headline: Deep Red Texas goes to an independent redistricting commission. Then the pressure on all the other states that haven't done so already, they'll begin to feel the pressure, and Texas will get credit for doing it. Even if it's not our idea. I think it's 11 states have done it. So we have 11 different models to choose from. We'll figure out what's just right for us. It's not perfect. There'll always be imperfections. But if we do that, it'll save democracy. Texas will get credit for it, which is why I don't spend a lot of time talking about this on the stump, because it puts people to sleep. But in my heart, it's the most important thing that we might accomplish together, if I'm honored to be the lieutenant governor.
Yeah, I think definitely this election is about saving democracy. I mean, democracy is on the line without a doubt.
No question.
Yes.
No question.
So I kind of asked this question. It's being asked by Pramila, who is also a member. Where do you think the votes are in this next election? Where do you think the opportunities are to get voters?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Well,
yeah.
I can share with you what, sort of Mike and his Ford F-150 travel around the state anecdotally. I can share with you. I will tell you that it needs to be, our campaigning needs to be very data driven. I'm very pleased to say that I was Joe Biden's senior advisor for his campaign in Texas. So after he won the nomination, they put a team together and I was asked to be the senior advisor. And I always tell people truthfully, I met him 3 times. The first time he called me Bob, the second time he called me Frank, the third time he called me. So I don't want to overstate the case. But I did have a chance to work with a world-class team, and I saw how in modern campaigning, which is so important here, in modern campaigning, how you link the data to the message to the modalities of communicating. And so if I'm honored to be the lieutenant governor, it'll be very, very data-driven. I don't look at the polls to tell me what I believe in, but I look in the polls to tell me who's responding to my message, who's hearing it, who's not hearing it, and then how are they responding, and how do I reach them? So it'll be very data-driven. Anecdotally, where I think it comes down to is I think Democrats are really quite energized and energizable. Democrats are very, very energized about a woman's right to choose, very energized about right to vote. For example, we're all energized, pardon the pun, we're all energized about the grid. There's probably 5 or 6 issues that really fire up Democrats that we need to make sure as candidates, we hold our head high and we can't be threading needles here. Talk about a woman's right to choose. It's easy to tiptoe around that as if you can be clever. No, you can't. You've got to hold your head high. If you don't believe in yourself, people aren't going to believe in you. I personally believe in a woman's right to choose, period. We'll fight for that. So I don't look at the polls to tell me what to think, but I do look at the polls to tell me who's listening and how do I reach them. I think we'll spend a lot of time in the suburbs. We'll spend a lot of time with Black voters, because I think they are responding to this idea that someone's trying to take their vote away. That's what the preachers are telling me. There's an awful lot of folks that will respond to the argument about the grid, property taxes. I mean, again, I know I sound like a broken record, but if you come back to the technical challenges that we face and go talk to people about here's the problem, here's the solution, that motivates people to the polls.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. So I think we need to wrap up soon. So I'm just going to ask like one more question for you. Okay, trying to figure out how to say this correctly. So I listened to Y'all-itics, and you mentioned Y'all-itics. It's a podcast. You were on Y'all-itics and the podcast.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So so you said on Y'all-itics, the podcast, you said that Dowd was more Republican than you. So I would like, I'd like for you to clarify what you meant by that. And so if we could do that, that'd be great. And then 2 is that why should we vote for you instead of Matthew Dowd?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I would just say, in terms of who's more Republican and who's not more Republican, I think it's important to put resumes side by side, which people will do, and then they'll decide who do they feel like will fight for their values. And if you look, the only thing I've done in politics, and I'm going to let him talk about himself. It would be improper for me to talk about him, but all I've done in politics, even though many years ago I counted myself amongst the Republicans, the only thing I've done in politics is fight for Texas Democrats. And I fought for Biden, and I fought for Harris, and I fought for shoulder to shoulder with Wendy and with Lupe, and I know all the folks have been fighting statewide for Democrats. I don't know anybody in this race or not who could put their resume next to mine and say, I also have fought for Democrats in Texas over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. So that's the point.
Okay.
And why vote for me and not him?
Yeah.
Well, everybody has to have this point of view that they ought to be the nominee, right?
Oh, well, of course.
It's not improper. It's not improper to think that I should be the nominee. No, I would say this. I mean, modern campaigning is very, very different. There's no substitute for being on the ballot, talking to voters, earning their trust, understanding what their hopes, concerns, fears are, having the relationships. It takes a tremendous infrastructure and relationship around the state. Pick any city, go into that city. If you don't have a half a dozen friends who are introducing you to folks and sharing with you what's on people's minds, if you don't know how to talk to them, if you don't know how to use all of the very, very ultra modern digital and other techniques for campaigning, you will not win. You will not win. And so what we pioneered in 2018, we came very, very close. That was a very, very recent success story, in my opinion. And it's not a big gap to go from what we did in 18 to win in 2022. And I think there's no question in anybody's minds that I've been fighting for the Texas Democratic Party. I mean, there's no question about what you get with this cat. So I think that adds up to, that's my raison d'etre.
Okay, that sounds great. So, okay, so where's your position with guns, your gun safety? Where do you stand with gun safety?
Well, I stand with Moms Demand Action. So there might be some Moms Demand Action here. I've cultivated a terrific relationship with Moms Demand Action. They have been so helpful to me in guiding me in terms of what policy makes sense. And I'll share with you what, if I were Moms Demand Action, I think what they would say, and I might get this wrong. And if I get this wrong, I'll find out in a hurry. And that's good. That's good politics to find out. We should have license to carry. We should have kept that. What we did was a terrible mistake because we're canceling gun safety and we don't know who has those guns. So we should go back to that. We should enforce the laws on the books. For example, if you're domestic violence, you shouldn't have a gun. I mean, those laws are on the books, but they aren't being enforced. When you enforce the laws that are on the books, they're there for a reason. And then we need to go one step further. And I think we need a background check system that works, and we don't. And then we need to go one step further and we need to have red flag laws so that if somebody is a threat to themselves, you go to a judge, you make your case, an independent arbiter decides temporarily. If we did those things, that would be a huge step forward in terms of gun safety. It's perfectly consistent with the Second Amendment. We must protect all of the amendments, the first, the second, the third, the fourth. This is perfectly consistent with the Second Amendment, and we need to take those steps. That's how I feel about guns.
Great.
And if I miss something from the moms, I expect that I'll hear about it because I need to.
Yeah. So, and speaking of moms, it's like one of the things we're trying to do is, of course, reach across the aisle. I mean, we have independent moms, Republican moms that are part of our group. So what would you tell some of these moms that are Republicans and independents? What would you tell them about why we need to vote Democrat this time around? Like, how do we reach some of these moms who are maybe on the line and who are also expected to vote with their husbands, along line with their husbands? So what would you tell these moms?
I guess what I would say, I mean, that's a wonderful question, Nancy. I'm going to sound a little bit repetitive, but what I would go back to is we should talk to them on a policy level and not on a partisan level. I think it would be a big mistake to go into Republican territory and say, here's why you should vote Democrat. Or it'd be a terrible mistake to go and talk to Republicans and say, here's why you should no longer be a Republican. I don't think that works. I think that falls completely flat. I think it hardens people's point of view. I actually think people will decide not to cross over if you do that. I think the thing to do is to focus on the policy. This is the problem. This is the solution. What do you think? And don't insult anybody. I mean, one of the big problems with Democrats viewed from Republicans is that we seem condescending to them.
Yeah.
There's an arrogance in us which is just awful. I hate that. And folks hate it too. So we have to be polite. We have to be welcoming. This is the problem. This is a solution. We can't hide from our Democratness. I'll give you a great example. I was at the Women's March the other day in Austin, and I was working the crowd, huge crowd.
Yeah.
And, because I'm running for office, my job is to go up and get between them and the speaker and say, hi, my name is Mike Collier. I'm running for lieutenant governor. Can I say hello? I ran into countless Republican women who were there because they've gone too far as to choice with their husbands. And occasionally we'd get into a discussion and I would hear this, well, Mike, we don't agree with you on many things at all. Maybe this, but we don't agree with you on anything at all. And I would say to them, and this worked beautifully, I would say, go to my website. You'll see my point of view on as many things as I could reasonably get in there. Ask yourself, where do we agree? And when you find places where we don't agree, at least know I'm sincere about it and I mean it. And the response is, okay, all right, okay, I like this guy. And it's respectful, policy oriented. I personally believe that's the key to success.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. I know I met you at the Women's March right behind
Did
the
we
stage.
meet?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
did.
okay.
We met there. I was one of the planners. I was part of the hosting group.
Oh, terrific, terrific.
Yeah, yeah. So we worked really hard to plan it, and it was
That's
great. So I
wonderful.
met
It was
back
a
there
wonderful day.
running around. I remember seeing you running around. So yeah, I'm so glad you enjoyed the event because we worked really hard to
Enjoyed
put
it
it.
thoroughly. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
a great event.
I thought
A
it was
lot
a
of
really
people.
great event.
Yeah,
Lot
great
of
event.
It was wonderful. Well, I hope, I wish you the best on the campaign trail, and I hope that we get a
Thank you.
chance to meet again, because I think there's still some questions that maybe didn't, go answered, but hopefully we'll get a chance to meet again. And I hope that you enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you. I enjoyed it
Yes.
thoroughly.
Yes, well,
And
thank you
we'll
so
we'll
much.
see you out there on the trail.
Yeah, we'll see you on the trail, and thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
have a nice evening.
All
Bye-bye.
right, so long.